Hi, everybody. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for your continued interest and support during this very challenging period for everybody. I will say at the top of this to please remember to like, share, and subscribe so that you can continue to stay informed about different events such as this one. I am excited to introduce the rest of the team here. We have Katrina, our executive director. We have Anne, our treasurer. We have Zach, our board chair, Dylan, our secretary, and we also have a special guest tonight. I will allow Anne to talk to you a little bit about her more later, but we have Miss Jamie joining us tonight as well. So we've been working to give our emails and our posts more cohesion by spending the month on a specific topic. And we are going to incorporate that topic into these chats as well as with our guest speakers. So our theme for June was storytelling. And we posted some very powerful North Carolina cannabis stories to our website, northcarolinanormal.org. Be sure to check them out on their very own page to get some inspiration for your own story. And we're going to continue to post these stories. And if we use yours, we will send you a free North Carolina Normal t-shirt. So definitely sign up. We still have t-shirts available. So we would love to collect your story. Anne, do you want to talk to us about our theme this month?
Great, yes. Our theme for July has been racial disparities in enforcement of prohibition. And we published we're calling them cannabis sessions now, basically a blog post about the ACLU's 2020 report, A Tale of Two Countries, Racially Targeted Arrest in the Era of Marijuana Reform. And that blog post focused on North Carolina and what's the state of racial disparities in North Carolina. We are also have recently become aware of the North Carolina Task Force on Racial Equality or for Racial Equality in Criminal Justice. And this task force was formed to recommend solutions to stop discriminatory law enforcement and criminal justice practices and to hold public safety officers accountable. So we're sending a response to that task force, what North Carolina Normal believes would be helpful in terms of changing our marijuana cannabis laws. And tonight, we're very excited to welcome Jamie Paulen, who is a defense attorney in North Carolina and has also served as a magistrate for several years. And Jamie's going to talk to us about from her perspective on racial disparities in cannabis. So Jamie, take it away. We're real excited to meet you.
Thank you, Anne. I just want to correct, it happens a good bit. My last name is Paulen. That's okay. It happens very frequently. Again, my name is Jamie Paulen. I'm an attorney in Orange County, and I primarily practice in the Triangle area. I was going to start and tell a little bit about myself and then a story of one of my clients and share some experiences from when I was a magistrate and then some ideas about things that we can do going forward. So a little bit about myself. I moved into North Carolina in 2010 and worked as a practicing attorney doing primarily civil litigation. In 2015, I left working a small firm out of RTP to take a job in the Orange County Magistrate's Office, which was really my first experience with the criminal justice system in any manner. As a child, I just wasn't exposed to it and didn't do criminal law in my practice. So I had definitely a crash course on criminal law. And then and that's really where my interest in criminal justice reform began. The person who helped me get the job actually told me that being a magistrate would make you, if you were liberal, it would make you more conservative. If you were conservative, it would make you more liberal. And I guess I felt way outside of that because I was already liberal and have become maybe almost more radical after the experience that I had. A few months after I left the magistrate's office, I became a justice impacted individual. I discovered my husband was having an affair and he took out false criminal charges against me. I spent a night in the very jail that I used to work in. And certainly that has a lot to do with the interest that I have in reforming law enforcement. So for those of you who don't know what a magistrate does, congratulations. That probably means that you have never been arrested. A magistrate is defined in North Carolina as a judicial official holding constitutional office. And so the job of the magistrate, no person in North Carolina can be sent to jail without being brought before a judicial official. And what that means in practice is that being a magistrate is a 24/7 job. I mean, not one person doing it 24/7, but there in every county, there is at any given time, there's a magistrate on duty. So in Orange County, we would do 24-hour shifts. And in practice, when the police arrest someone, they bring that person in handcuffs before the magistrate, and the law enforcement officer testifies as to the basis of the arrest. And it's up to the magistrate to decide that either there is probable cause or there is not. So if there's probable cause, the magistrate would then set what's called the release conditions, which basically boils down to either the person is released on a written promise to appear, or what people commonly call being released on their own recognizance, or a bond is set and the person is sent to jail for someone to come and pay some amount of money to have them released pending their trial. So if the magistrate finds that there's no probable cause, then the person's handcuffs are removed and they're supposed to be released. And I don't need statistics to know that even in what we call liberal Orange County, that there are inequities based on race as far as who gets arrested. I can specifically recall a time that there was a breaking and entering in Chapel Hill, and the basis for the individual that was arrested was that he was a Black man wearing a hoodie. And this was after Trayvon Martin. And so it seemed like even years after that tragic incident, the same facts, the same bases were being used for people's arrest. And so according to the ACLU in North Carolina, Black folks are 3.3 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana offenses. Here in Orange County, again, where we consider ourselves to be very liberal, that's 6 times. So a Black person is 6 times as likely to be arrested for a marijuana offense than a white person. And that really does match my experience being a magistrate, that most of the people that I saw in Orange County were people of color. So I'd like to tell you a story of a client of mine. I'm going to do what I can. I don't want her to be identifiable, but this is a young Black woman who had been, in her late teens, 2 very close friends of hers died in tragic accidents. And they were separate incidents, somewhat interrelated. And then the second incident, she had some tangential involvement in it. And as a result of that experience, she was in private school. She was adopted and thankfully for her, had a fairly wealthy family. But so she in school started to struggle, started to hang out with what her parents would have said was a bad crowd, doing some things that they didn't particularly approve of. And one day she got in her vehicle and was driving around. She had one of her taillights was out. Law enforcement pulled her over and they asked her if they could search her vehicle. She, being young and sort of naive, didn't know that she should not have consented. She consented, and the law enforcement officer found a marijuana pipe. And it was the cartridge type. I'm not an expert in paraphernalia, but there was no actual marijuana in this pipe at the time. So they charged her with possession of marijuana paraphernalia, and this was in Wake County. she, at that point, her parents hired me to help her through the criminal process. And in Wake County, they have a diversion program. And we entered her into the diversion program, which requires community service, an educational class, and the person has to basically stay out of legal trouble for 6 months. And if they meet, and they have to regularly, like, I don't know how many times they test them, but they at least test once to make sure that they're not using. And then if they meet all of those criteria after 6 months, the charges can be released against them. And so this young woman participated in the educational program. And so she paid for a lawyer. I mean, her parents paid for a lawyer. They had to pay for this program. She had to do over 25 hours of community service. If you think about how expensive that is, the reason that she was able to do this was that she had middle-class parents that were able to pay for it. It's extremely expensive. And then the person is also required to pay court costs as well. I don't know what that figure is, but if I had to guess, it was probably about $1,000 for her to go through and do all of those things. So the case took a somewhat interesting twist when the law enforcement officer charged her, they seized this pipe and then sent it off to the SBI to test. So in North Carolina, you are in possession of a controlled substance, even if it's only residue. And so a subsequent warrant was issued because they tested the residue inside of this pipe and they found that it was positive for marijuana. And then she was additionally charged with possession of marijuana. So it stemmed out of the same incident, right? But because of the way that diversion program is set up, that it says you cannot get into separate, you can't have a separate incident, it involved further payment to me to go basically to the diversion office and explain what happened. And thankfully for her, again, because she could afford an attorney, I was able to straighten everything out and basically explain to the people in the diversion program that she hadn't, in fact, gotten into subsequent trouble. It was really all stemming out of the same incident. And so she was actually scheduled to have all of her charges dismissed, and then COVID happened. This young person was trying to transfer from the school that she was in to a different college and was really concerned about whether the university that she wanted to enter into was going to allow her to do so, because they have one of those check boxes that says, have you ever been arrested? And because of how long it takes 6 months to get through the diversion program. And then if you seek to have your record expunged, in normal circumstances, that takes 6 months. And now the courts are saying it's going to take more like 9 months. And so this young woman had wanted to start this coming year at a different school, because part of all of this sort of came from hanging out with a crowd that was maybe encouraging some behavior that wasn't ideal. There was more involved with the incident than just, I'll say, than just cannabis use. So in the end, for her, it's a mixed bag. So on one hand, the charges have been dismissed. The expungement paperwork has been filed, but the charges won't be expunged probably even before the end of this calendar year. So that means she's waiting until next year to be able to transfer schools. And so I had a conversation with her and her parents where they asked me, what could she have done differently? And I said, number one, don't ever consent to a search. There's just no reason. I think she probably just didn't have any idea that she had the right to say no. And law enforcement definitely will take advantage of that. They're not going to tell you, would you like me to, can I search your vehicle? You have the right to say that I can't do it. When I worked in the magistrate's office, we had, in Orange County, we have a magistrate's office in the jail, but then there's also a magistrate's office in the Chapel Hill Police Department. And one of the late nights I was in the Chapel Hill Police Department, one of the officers told me that it was his policy that he did not charge people with simple marijuana possession, less than a half ounce, because he believed that at some point marijuana is going to be fully legalized in North Carolina, and that it really wasn't worth his time to even cite somebody. So he would basically destroy it. And I thought about that in reference to this young woman that, you know, it's delayed her educational opportunities, and that essentially she didn't even have like an appreciable amount of marijuana. The additional step of having this pipe tested for marijuana seemed completely unnecessary. If the idea was to discourage her from further use, the fact that she'd already been charged with the offense of having the paraphernalia was probably going to be enough to at least get her attention. She was already in the program, being tested, learning more about substance abuse. And interestingly, she did eventually tell me that it was, she was paired in this program with people that had like really serious drug abuse problems. Like you're talking about a young woman using a small amount of marijuana, which I don't know that I know anybody who hasn't done that, but was paired with people with really serious like narcotic addictions. And so she felt like the educational program itself was actually harmful in a way. But nonetheless, that was just one story of one individual that I worked with that I actually think the result for her, all things considered, wasn't terrible. But again, it was having the resources to have a lawyer, having the resources to be able to pay all of her court costs, having the resources to be able to participate in this diversion program. And so what I, as an activist and an organizer, what I think about in my county, I think about my elected official, the district attorney. That individual here in Orange County is Jim Woodall. And we do have a diversion program here for substance abuse. I'm not super familiar with the details of that program, but we do have one. But I think given what that Chapel Hill police officer told me, that there's a huge amount of discretion on every level, everywhere in the system. One law enforcement officer can say, if I find a roach or whatever, I'm going to throw it down at the side of the road and twist my foot on it. And I'm not even going to go through the trouble because I don't want to be called into court. That's a whole lot of work for very little return as far as the nature of that criminal offense. And so for people who are really interested in the ways of this, how this injustice impacts people, I think that contacting your whichever law enforcement office you are most intimately familiar with. So I live in Hillsborough. That would be, for me, it would be the Hillsborough Police Department and the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and say to them, you don't have to arrest people for small amounts of marijuana. I would like for you to consider just not charging people with those offenses. It's certainly well within their discretion. Law enforcement does not charge every individual with every offense that they possibly can. They just don't, it doesn't work that way. So you can lean on your local officials that way, and then you can contact your district attorney and talk to the district attorney about, if there isn't a diversion program, creating one, hopefully creating one that's free, and also asking the district attorney not to prosecute those offenses. So, any questions?
So the diversion programs are not universal throughout the state? That's just wild.
No, and I think that they're typically formed by the district attorney's office. So I think in many of these cases, the district attorney realizes that an unreasonable amount of resources are being used to enforce a law that if, for example, if my client had been driving through Denver, she doesn't, maybe the law enforcement officer pulls her over and says, your taillight's out, are you okay? And then she goes on. And so how many resources have been expended to put this young person behind in her educational goals? I mean, it's not tragic in her case, but it's unfortunate that these opportunities for her are delayed. And there's no doubt in my mind that that a good bit of the reason that they asked her to search her vehicle is because she's a Black woman.
Yeah, definitely is a story, is a very informative story. And Jamie, I thank you for giving us some action steps of ways that we can contact our elected officials to try and improve things as much as we can at every level that we can. So does anyone else have any questions for Jamie tonight? Well, Jamie, we really appreciate your time. And everyone who is watching or views this later, if you have a story of how enforcement of North Carolina cannabis laws has impacted your life, please submit it as a my NC Cannabis story. That's hashtag my NC Cannabis story. And we really thank everyone for joining us, and we will see you all here in August.
Bye.